We have notification of substitute members. Councillor English.
Councillor English for Councillor Firmer.
And Councillor Barnard.
Councillor Barnard for Councillor Powell.
Thank you very much. I don't think we have any urgent items. We managed to get them all on the agenda. I can't see any visiting members. Do we have any visiting members? No, I don't see that. And I better go back to the beginning and say the usual that I always forget. Can I just, before we go in, yes, you seem a long way away, but I can see you, and Councillor McLaughlin, I can see you, and I've asked Mr Bailey to kick me in the ankle if I miss you. So anyway, can I just go back and say we're not expecting the fire alarm, but if it does sound, please remain seated to enable Mr Bailey to assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if necessary. And tonight's proceedings, as you can imagine, are being webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending recording these proceedings, can you please let me know now? And I don't see anybody indicating, but I ask the question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room, but I can't see any other members tonight, know that this is taking place. So we don't have any visiting members. Disclosures by members and officers, are there any? I don't see anybody indicating. Disclosures of lobbying, has anybody been lobbied? No. To consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. I do see that we have one item on the agenda that falls under this. Are you happy that this should be taken as yellow pages, members? Sorry, your hand went up so quickly. Did you wish to say anything or your disagreement? Yeah.
Just wanted to mention something, because whilst it's not on yellow paper, I think questions probably related to agenda item 13 might wish to be taken partly under, confidential. It depends really on what, how we proceed on that item, given the lack of information we have.
I think you've actually preempted something I was going to say, which is we will have to be careful when we get to the papers that are on the open session, that we don't stray into the yellow pages, but we'll take it as we go through, and obviously I will tell you if you're going into the yellow pages in the first part of the meeting. Can we have one meeting, please? It is possible that under one of the items, people may unwittingly raise something to do with the yellow pages. It shouldn't happen, but if it does, we will stop you and point it out. So, without more ado, can we go to the minutes of the meeting held on the 15th of February, which you will find on page 1. Yes, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I left the meeting for one item. It's on page 6, just before item 190, in case I didn't believe I had an interest, but I know some of the folk that have been involved in that before. So if we can just record that I left the meeting and then rejoined it after that item had been discussed.
All right, so I'll go back to page 1 and check for accuracy. Page 2. Page 3, page 4, page 5, 6, 7, and 8. Can I take that as a true record and sign the minutes? With that amendment, Can I have an agreed that I can hear, please, if it is agreed? Thank you very much. I don't think we have any petitions, is that correct? And we don't have any questions and answers. Right. The committee work programme, have we got anybody who's actually just going to say that that's the same? Or? I think we have one amendment to it. No? Oh.
Just the... Yeah, the only change since it's been published is that the housing and regeneration strategy will now be going to the June meeting.
Is that all right, members? Have you made that note? To the yes, to the June meeting. Thank you. So we now go to agenda item 12, which you'll find on pages 10 to 22 of the original papers that you received. And Mrs. Norris, I believe you're going to introduce that for us.
That's correct. The purpose of the report is to ask the committee to approve the discretionary housing payment policy. The terms background, Maidstone receives an annual grant from the Department of Work and Pensions. Sorry, I do apologise. Would you like me to start again? Yeah? Okay. The purpose of the report is to ask the committee to approve the discretionary housing payment policy. In terms of the background, Maidstone receives an annual grant from the Department of Work and Pensions to provide financial support to residents who are in receipt of housing benefit or the housing element of universal credit and require additional support. The grant is ring-fenced for that purpose and has seen significant growth in recent years. It is aimed at alleviating some of the pressures of the welfare reforms. Maidstone are due to receive a grant of $325,000 for the financial year of 2017-18, which is an increase of $100,000 from 16-17, but less than 1% of the annual housing benefit expenditure. Within the policy, the aims of the scheme can be summarised by helping to alleviate poverty, preventing homelessness, and provide support for vulnerable families at a time of crisis. The scheme also achieves through making financial awards, often as part of a package of support to help the customer move on, setting a clear expectation that those requesting assistance are expected to help themselves. Making awards typically are short-term, 13 weeks, in order to help that transitional change, although longer-term awards are made where, for example, the customer has long-term health issues. Ensuring that all the awards are means-tested to make sure that the support goes to the ones that are in genuine need. Are there any questions?
Councillor Harper, you were first.
The questions really were probably to do with page 22, which is the sort of split of... can you hear? Sorry. On page 22, which is to do with the split of the age and disability tables. I must admit, initially I was reading them the wrong way around, but one of the things which concerns me, and it's obviously referred to in the conclusion, is, as we all know from previous reports, the impact of proposed changes to housing benefit and so on for people between 18 and 34. And obviously the 25 to 34 age range, clearly the number of claims, that's where we're getting the bulk of the claims for this assistance, and presumably it's likely to increase further as the welfare reforms come through. So I suppose the first thing is, are officers anticipating further increases in that category? And also, are they anticipating, if you like, a greater increase in the number of applications than any increase there might have been in the grant? Because I'm just thinking we might start to face greater pressure going forward with the impact of some of the proposals, especially for the under 35, and perhaps we can necessarily, accommodate within this budget. I suppose that's the first one. And the second one, I was a bit surprised in terms of disability, because it's almost counterintuitive, where we're obviously saying that 16% of our population are classified as having a disability, which I must admit depends how you define disability, but is a relatively high proportion. Yet only 11.5% of these claims are coming through from that group. And I just wondered if the officers had any idea as to why that's, sort of relatively low, given the needs of people with disabilities. I would have thought they would meet a lot of the criteria, and therefore you'd be getting a higher proportion of claims coming through from that, especially in terms of things like, the impact of, I can't think of the technical term, but the bedroom tax, which, but it does disproportionately hit people with disabilities, especially if you have to have extra bedrooms as a result of that. So that, I just wondered perhaps, a bit of elaboration could be given on those.
I believe Mr McGuinness, you wanted to come back on that one?
Thank you, Chair. In relation to the first item, the kind of under 35s, the discretionary housing payment scheme in the main is to help people with a kind of transition, so people that perhaps are in accommodation which they could once afford and can no longer afford because of the changes. So the scheme provides perhaps a period of extra support whilst they seek more affordable accommodation. The hope would be over a period of time that with the right advice people would look to source and secure accommodation that was affordable based on the housing benefit rules without the need for discretionary housing payments. But overall, the increase that Mrs Norris referred to, kind of over £100,000, really kind of recognises, I think, the fact that the Department for Work and Pensions know that welfare reform impacts on people in different ways, and this gives us some flexibility to help those most in need. With regards to the percentages for disabled reductions, there has been a whole kind of wide range of welfare reforms. Generally, those affecting housing benefit have impacted on disabled households to a lesser extent. The benefit cap, for example, which impacted on quite a large number of households, there were specific exclusions for disabled people. So I think it would be fair to say that they've been affected in a different way, which would support the fact that we've had a lower proportion of claims.
Councillor Harper, do you want to come back?
Obviously, okay, so this is in terms of trying to some extent, help people move to more affordable accommodation. But as we know, the problems we've got in the local housing market and so on, if you're a young single person, affordable accommodation is of relatively limited supply unless you're earning a reasonable amount of money. And we know from the economic development stuff we've done in the borough that wages in Maidstone aren't particularly high with the nature of our economy. So I'm just it just strikes me as, I think we are likely to be seeing much greater pressures on that element going forward, leading possibly to, more issues around people's mental health and so on, and perhaps rough sleeping.
Councillor Harper, that sounds as though it's something that we should perhaps be discussing under the wider housing strategy. I just wondered whether the Chief Exec wanted to say how we could put it into that, just so we pick it up and don't lose it for... Sorry.
That's fine. So, I think as we have observed before, there are a number of places where we express our housing strategy, and there may be some scope for simplifying that. So we have an overarching strategy, plus some very specific areas of policy, for example, for temporary accommodation. I think those are the places where we express our position in terms of the amount of housing in the borough and the need overall, and the tenure that we are pursuing, and then finally our contribution to that, which will be through our own housing development schemes. And this committee will be aware that we are developing some of those. So I think those are the places really to pursue have we got the right amount of the right type in the right place. I think the next opportunity for this committee to consider some of those issues will be at its June meeting when we look at the housing and regeneration strategy. So can I suggest we pick the matters up there?
Yeah. As long as, as the leader of the council said, as long as they're noted by officers, so that, those points sort of don't get missed.
So as it's coming here later in the cycle, we can pick some of those issues up there. So, Councillor Blackmore, you were next on the list.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I think it's good to acknowledge that central government realise that with the welfare reforms there will be losers in this. So therefore these are necessary payments which will help to ease certain people's situations. And for that reason I'd like to move the recommendation, please, on page 10.
Thank you, noted. I have another 3 people who've indicated that they wish to speak for now. So I have got you, Councillor McLaughlin. And so if I move to Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. The figure of 325,000, how does the DWP allocate that to us? Is that the same for all councils, or is it based on some sort of criteria?
Each council is allocated an allotted amount of money. So we were given 325,000. Tunbridge Wells were given a different amount of money. Every authority is different. So,
is there a set thing that means that we get more money or less money than other councils?
it is based on spent and caseload.
Are you satisfied? Councillor Round, you are next.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst I'm happy to go along with this, I just wanted to just tighten up for me to actually understand the scale of the thing. We're dealing in percentages here. Can somebody just give me a scale of the number of actual applicants we get?
We awarded 286 awards so far this year. We had 276 non-awards, and then we had what we would say 7 reconsiderations where we had made a decision, perhaps they turned it down, and then obviously they asked us to reconsider that decision.
Councillor Round, anything else to add? Councillor English.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Clearly, Councillor Harper made some valid points about wider housing issues. To remember that basically what we're talking about here is helping people of various categories over a hitch, a hump, a problem for the short term. And most people who are, for example, disabled, that's going to be a long-term condition, unless they've actually been injured in an accident or something like that, from which they're likely to recover fairly quickly. So it's quite right, that, as you and the Chief Executive suggested, that we be looking at those issues in a wider context. In terms of that context, the situation is likely to worsen for disabled people in particular categories, particularly those who suffer from mental health issues, because of unfortunate decisions supported by both major political parties to essentially withdraw large elements of support for people who suffer from mental health issues, and basically downgrading the importance of health issues that are not physical, and that is a crying shame. But so we will have to look at some of those issues in a wider context, but they're not really appropriate to the discussion tonight. And so I support the recommendation on the papers at this stage. Clearly, if there is a considerable pressure, we will have to revisit it, but this does seem to be the appropriate response for this time at this stage.
Thank you. I think all political parties here have actually said how concerned they are about the support for mental health. I think that's fair to say. So clearly I think there'll be an effort on behalf of everybody here to pick those issues up when we come to the wider debate. Councillor McLaughlin, and then I have Councillor Bright.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just ask the officers to clarify for me how this strategy actually helps people get back into employment, which is a claim that's made in the papers, but I note wasn't repeated by the officer when she addressed it. Thank you.
what happens is that we will actually make a short-term award or a longer-term award to help the family overcome financial difficulties at that time in order for them to look at perhaps obviously getting employment. So we will be actually providing them with financial assistance in sort of with their shortfall, if there is a shortfall on their housing benefit payments.
May I just come back on that? So it isn't specifically related to assistance with their accommodation, are you saying? Because if somebody's not in work, I'd have thought they'd qualify for unemployment benefits in another way.
Perhaps if I could add an example. One of the recent changes in relation to the benefit cap, where people's benefits have been restricted to a certain limit. One of the consideration in whether or not that's applied is whether or not somebody's in employment. So one way of alleviating the benefit cap is to take employment for 16 hours a week or more, in which case your benefits are unrestricted and you can receive a kind of full rate of housing benefit. So if there's somebody that's had difficulties or crisis in their life which has meant they've not been able to return to work, they're now in a position to, then we would work with Job Centre Plus, where they will provide the support and encouragement to help the person rejoin the labour market, and we may offer some short-term assistance whilst they're receiving that support and advice to regain the labour market. So our involvement will be restricted to financial support with the rent, but it will be part of a wider package of support to help the person back into employment.
Councillor English, is it on this specific point?
Yes. I think the fundamental point that people have to realise is just how difficult it is even to claim benefit, let alone get a job without a fixed address. And fundamentally, if you can't keep people living in a secure permanent address, or at least long-term temporary address, we aren't going to be able to help them with any of the other problems. It is fundamental to resolving people's problems, employment or otherwise.
Thank you. Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the report. I just had a couple of questions. I note that any money unspent is returned at the end of the year. How much, if you want to share, you might not want to disclose that amount, was returned last year, i.e. did we spend quite up to the amount that we had? Because you guys are quite good at, you've done this for a few years and you know what you're working within. And does the amount of money provided to individual applicants vary at any point in the year, depending on how much you know is left in the pot? Or is it just, you have standard awards that you make and you just keep going if that money, you think that money were to run out, so to speak?
Unfortunately, I haven't got the figure for last year, but I do happen to know this year that we've got £500 and 3p left in the budget. So we have actually nearly spent all of this year. The aim is to spend all of our money that we have. We don't wish to give anything back to the Department of Work and Pensions. So from that point of view, all awards are dealt with on an individual basis. So somebody might be paying a shortfall, or others might get an expenditure award for some sort of assistance they need to move into more affordable accommodation. Obviously, we work closely with our housing department team to prevent homelessness as well. That's a key factor that we try and do, and we try and work with our housing associations as well.
So, our thanks, obviously, for managing the budget so well, because that's pretty good to have managed it to such a tight figure. And I know if you give any money back, they'll just probably reduce your grant going forward. I have a follow-on point. I note that in order to claim this, you need to be on benefits, but obviously housing benefit will be, won't be able to be applied for if you're in a lower age band. So, does this, maybe we take that back to the committee that Chair mentioned in terms of, does this policy need to be reviewed to make sure that any folks that aren't eligible to apply, they don't slip through the net, I guess?
As a discretionary scheme, it is fairly open. The only fixed criteria set by the Department for Work and Pensions is the applicant has to be in receipt of either housing benefit or the housing element of universal credit. So if somebody didn't qualify for either of those two benefits, we couldn't consider a discretionary housing payment.
Do you want to come back and say that you would wish us to discuss that as part of a wider debate?
I think we should, to see, because obviously those folk won't be eligible to apply for that benefit, and therefore we won't, through this fund, be able to help them. But we obviously would want to seek to prevent any homelessness amongst that age group, that lower age group.
Again, I think that's something that exercises the minds of all councillors across all political groups. So, officers, if you can note that, and we'll try and pick it up in the wider debate. I have nobody else indicating to speak, so I'm going to move to the vote. It was moved by Councillor Blackmore, seconded by Councillor Borton. Can I have a show of hands, please, for the recommendation that you'll find on page 10 of your agenda? 4. That is unanimous. So nobody against and nobody abstaining. Thank you. And thank you very much, Mrs. Norris. And Mr. McGuinness, are you staying for anything else? So we move now to agenda item 13. No, yes, which is pages 30 to 35, I think. The report of Director of Regeneration and Place regarding property acquisitions.
It's on the amended agenda.
Yes, on the amended agenda. And I think it's Mr. Cornell, please, to introduce.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Yes, this report comes off the back of the temporary housing strategy that was considered by the Communities Housing and Environment Committee back in December. As part of that overall package that we put forward, an agreement was made to invest up to 3.9 mil in 13 units of accommodation for temporary housing. Just by way of update, I'm pleased to report that our team have now got up to 7 properties with offers accepted on them, so we're moving forward apace. But what this report is looking for is to delegate approval for the final decisions to be made by my colleague Mark Green, Director of Finance and Business Improvement, in terms of the final decisions and moving to acquisition on those properties, together with consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of the Communities Housing and Environment Committee. So it's just to enable us to be more agile, if you like, in the...
This committee.
This one. Yes. I beg your pardon. In the marketplace, because obviously the housing market is very competitive at the moment, and so we need to put in place a structure for rapid decision making. But happy to take any further questions.
Councillor English.
And I well recall a certain property, well, more than one property, which the council has expressed an interest in the past, and in order to deal with similar problems, and we were simply unable to move quickly enough. Our interest became known because of the time it was taking, and we failed to secure those properties in 2 cases, and in another case I don't think it was because our interest became known, but we still weren't able to move quickly enough. So it's quite clear that we do need to have this ability. And provided we're sticking within the parameters agreed, which we have to do, and the budget agreed, which we have to do, I think there is a great deal to be said for it, because we undoubtedly have a problem. We need to address that problem, and if there are advantages to the people of Maidstone and to the council's financial position for doing so. So I think it's essential. My only nitpick with the report is, once again, you used the wrong word, principle. It's not that type of principle. It's the other one in the report. So I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you. So that's moved by Councillor English, seconded by Councillor Harwood. And I have 2 other people who have indicated that at this point that they wish to speak. Councillor Harper.
Yeah, I mean, the principle, I'm sure everybody here supports the principle, as we discussed it at the council meeting, we discussed it here in the past, of purchasing property to help alleviate homelessness in the borough. One of the things which just surprises me on this report, and actually the officer almost, it alluded to, because it says in paragraph 1.2, obviously one of the reasons for urgency, our agent has identified suitable properties for purchase. And in your introduction, you said 7 of the 13 we've actually got offers in on at the moment. But we're not actually told here at all where they are or what they are. Now, we could have had an appendix to this in yellow, since we've got a yellow item on something else in terms of a property purchase. It's only that I'm aware that only under a year ago, we had a considerable problem in the Fant area where officers had unwillingly suggested purchasing a property which was utterly unacceptable for what you were wanting to do. And that led to a massive furore in a particular area. And ultimately, I think the council withdrew from proceeding. So I'm not against delegating this to the chair and the vice chair, who I'm sure have got, a good nous on them when it comes to looking at these sorts of things. But, there can be really big sensitivities related to individual proposals. And I just think we need to be quite careful in terms of when we're purchasing property, that we don't purchase property what perhaps isn't appropriate for the type of use we're looking at, which we, as I say, we did almost fall into only a year ago.
Councillor Harper, are you suggesting perhaps that we should include the ward councillor so at least they know? I mean, it's not going to be with the best will in the world, the officer, Councillor Blackmore and myself will not know every single street in the borough.
I would actually, what you've just suggested would be a very good amendment to this decision. Well, the relevant ward councillor is made aware, because he or she may have information which might just help in terms of a decision.
Mr. Cornell.
And it won't hold anything up, will it? I mean, you're both being notified.
It could do, but Mr. Cornell wants to come back and say.
Thank you. Only to say that I couldn't see why that couldn't be a workable scenario.
What does the committee generally feel about this? Just a minute. Yes, I know. So you, as the mover, and Councillor Harwood as the seconder, will not accept that as an amendment?
I'll move it formally as an amendment to the recommendation then.
I think I was just going to say I think that sounds a very sensible perspective, so I'm happy to second that if that hasn't already been seconded, or I'm not sure if it's been moved yet.
Councillor Borton.
Can I speak on both the issue that's addressed and then the wider
Yes, you can.
point? Okay. Well, I quite agree, and Councillor Harper's quite right. We had a hell of a furore in Fant Ward last year, and so it's absolutely appropriate that ward councillors are consulted here. And so I definitely support that amendment. There is a broader point here, which is I'm actually quite. Before Councillor Harper spoke, there was more or less unanimous thought around the room. But I'm a little bit concerned about this, but concerned on the basis don't know what we can do, because as far as I can see, we're in this position. We've got our reports in front of us because of a good old failing of this council, which is a committee system, because there's no councillor there to take responsibility and to make these decisions. And officers are very good at this council. I don't doubt them for a moment, but ultimately we're the councillors and we put ourselves out there to be elected to make these big decisions, and these are big decisions. And I think we are absolving ourselves of blame to an extent with this report in front of us. So I have an issue with the principle of councillors delegating decisions to officers in this particular instance, considering the magnitude of the issue, considering how it can get communities very worked up, as we saw in Fant last year as well, and of who makes the decisions. But we are where we are, and we're not going to change the committee system tonight, and I accept that. But I did want to put that point on record, because I think this proves what a lot of us have been saying for a long time about the way this council is run. Having said that, I'm not going to make an issue out of it, so I'm happy to support Councillor Harper's amendments, and that's all I'll say.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Initially, I didn't want to support Councillor Harper's comments because I feel it could be unwieldy, especially in the wards where you have 3 councillors, to try to get the more people you have to get together in a short space of time, the more difficult it is to find space in a diary. And the reason we're trying to do this is to make sure that we have the ability to make the commercial acquisition quite quickly. I will agree to this, but there's a caveat, and the caveat is we don't sit there and say, well, look, we'll offer 5 meeting dates when everyone can get together. It's, this is the date, this is the time. If the ward councillors cannot make it, they cannot make it. There is no reason to exclude anyone because the officer has said that is workable. But my concern is we could start trying to throw things in the long grass and acquisitions may move away from us. So I think as long as we can keep it tight, I'm happy to support that recommendation because, as Mr Cornell says, he believes that possible.
Well, first of all, I believe that we don't even have to have a meeting in relation to this. Mostly it can be done, I've got you, mostly it can be done by email. It is an opportunity coming. We need to move quickly. Clearly, we didn't want an officer to be put in the position where we hear exactly what Councillor Borton has said, that officers are taking too much upon themselves, which was why it was suggested that the delegation should go in to the officer in consultation with the chairman and the vice chairman of this committee. I hear this is going to be moved as an amendment that the ward councillors are included. Councillor Borton, in the main, I agree with you that as much should come to committee as is possible, but this is one of those occasions, as Councillor English explained, where we lose property after property after property if we wait for committee cycles. The other alternative is that we have to find reasons to meet over and over again, which is also a great cost on the borough to call meetings. So who is precisely moving an amendment? Is it Councillor Harper? Would you like to say precisely what it is?
Okay. After, where we've got a case by case in brackets, in consultation with the chair and the vice chair of this committee, and that the ward councillors are included. And the appropriate ward councillors are included, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Say it again for Mr. Bailey, please.
Relevant after so in recommendation 1, after we've got in the brackets, in consultation with the chair and vice chair of this committee, I suppose then you have a comma, and that the ward councillors are included. Oh, no, you don't need to say that. And the ward councillors. Yeah. Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Just.
Sorry, we have had a fair bit of discussion around this, but it's now been formally tabled. Does anybody wish to speak to it? Yes. Well, I said, speak about it then, if you want those words. Councillor Harwood, you indicated first. Councillor English was next.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, firstly, I think we've rehearsed the efficiency and the ergonomic requirement to move quickly when it comes to property acquisition. However, my key concern is a philosophical one here, in that we all know that accommodation for people who are moving out from homelessness situations, bail hostels. I still wear the scars from the women's refuge that I championed in my ward, can become very, very political. And my concern is that we end up with stasis, effectively, that every time we're looking at a property, the cat's out of the bag. You get neighbours concerned about, problems which may never actually materialise, and that leads to frustrating what is a really, really significant need in this borough. And I could see what seems fairly reasonable on the surface actually turning out to be a millstone round the neck of tackling homelessness in this borough.
Councillor English.
I had the displeasure of reading some of the correspondence relating to a certain property that was referred to earlier in the debate. I've never read such hate-filled, bigoted, ignorant comments from members of the public. I fear very much that what will happen is what happened with a number of other proposals, like the one that Tony refers to with the women's refuse, which has never caused any trouble, that people who, and I'm afraid there are very many of them, who think that homeless people deserve to be homeless and battered women deserve to be battered, and I'm afraid there are a lot of them out there, will organise and say, not in my backyard, I want it anywhere, but you can have it anywhere, but not next door to me. I very much feel that if we do go down this path, well-intentioned though it may be, we will not get most of these properties because there will be a lot of ill-founded opposition, and where the properties have gone forward, they have almost always resulted in no problems or very few problems. But the public fears and responses that have come in before them in many cases have been horrific, really horrible, nasty and unpleasant. And I really have to say, I suspect we will have a lot less accommodation than we would like if we go down this path. And I fear for the consequences. I really do. And I hope people won't support the amendment, well-intentioned though it is.
My understanding is, so please officers correct me if I'm wrong, that when we are at the point where we've been advised there's a property and we wish to pursue it and purchase it, it is not in the public domain, and it will be an email to the chairman, the vice chairman and the ward councillors, and it will be confidential. And the only reason that we're actually, if I say, I don't mean this in a derogatory sense, but the only reason we're inviting the ward councillors to be involved isn't so that they can go out and start to make an issue of it, but they could highlight if there was a particular problem that is, and that seems, I have to say, that seems to me to be reasonable at this point in time. If we found that it was being made a political football or a wider issue was being made of it, we would have to rethink it. But I think we have to at least give councillors some credence at this point in time of acting responsibly. But I have councillor, hang a minute, you can come back, Councillor English, but I've got Councillor Ball.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairman. If we listen to Councillor English, you'd think that all councillors were NIMBYs, and the fact is that we as councillors have got to balance what our local residents want, who are frankly the people who put us here, for the needs of the borough, and I think we're all responsible to do that. And so for the addition of 3 words to add "and ward councillors," I think it's perfectly within ward councillors' rights to be consulted on such issues in the ward, and frankly, the decision that's made is going to be our heads on the chopping block, ultimately. So the idea to suggest that, that the ward councillors will, as a consequence of this, always oppose everything when no problems might come about is absolute nonsense.
Councillor English, I will let you come back once.
I won't refer to the names, but there are members of this council who are on record as saying, I will oppose any social housing in my ward, let alone housing for the homeless. And none of them are here this evening, but there are members of the council who have taken that view. Fine. Secondly, just on a factual issue, Councillor Borton referred to this issue being due to the committee system. Well, I have to enlighten you as to recent history. When we had the cabinet system, the property system purchases were referred in advance to a property advisory board, a committee, if you like, subcommittee of councillors. So it's not as if the committee system has made any substantial changes, because it was dealt with, property was dealt with by a committee in the Property Investment Advisory Board under the cabinet system. So please get your facts right before you speak.
Councillor Bryce.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just clarify, this report is with regard to 13 properties that came up as a Yellow Pages item at a previous meeting. This is not setting a precedent for every purchase that the Council is going to make for the next financial year. So in effect, we already, and stop me if I stray into something I'm not supposed to talk about, but we already know these properties, we've already debated it, and we already know, so the ward councillors would probably already be aware if they weren't already.
Councillor Bryce, these relate specifically to the number of properties we've agreed should be purchased for a precise reason within the budget that this committee agreed and then gave as part of the budget to full council. It is not across the board with every single thing we're thinking of doing. It's very specific to this. You'll see from the papers that it's making it very clear that details of any completed purchases are reported back to the next meeting of this committee, so that this committee can keep a handle on what's going forward all the way through. It is purely and simply so that we don't lose the opportunities as they arise. That is all it is to do with.
So it doesn't refer to a set of properties that we were previously seeking to acquire. This is just a figure of 13 that we may or may not, depending on the budget, depending on how much we can get for our money. But we just want to give them the freedom to purchase up to 13. So we haven't identified any opportunities at this point in time. Okay.
Yeah, come in, Councillor.
Yes, Councillor Bryce, just as I said when I introduced the report, since December things have moved on now, so we've got 7 properties under offer. So we're, obviously some of those will fall away inevitably as the due diligence process goes on. So it's a rolling programme of identifying properties till we get 13 acquired. So, okay.
And this committee's already discussed those 7 or so, haven't they? Yeah. So it's just the remaining 6 that we're looking to. No. Okay.
No, the 7 that are under offer at the moment haven't been sort of shared or taken through any committee.
Councillor Cox.
I wonder if I could ask officers or the Chief Exec, under what circumstances, if the information was shared with ward councillors, would the ward councillors be able to say, no, I don't like that one, or no, because it's too near built-up area, there's not enough parking? I wonder under what circumstances the officer would then say, I've looked at where this is, I've looked at how apt it is for us to use a property of this type, it would convert correctly, it would give everything we want. Under what circumstances do you think you would accept a ward councillor going, oh no, I don't think you should buy that one?
Can we have one meeting, please? Do you want to come back?
All I'd say on this is, obviously there's both positions are workable as far as I'm concerned in terms of overseeing the programme of acquisitions. But I don't think we could sort of have a criteria list, could we? But I think it's apparent that everyone, on the committee is sort of united in support of this programme, so I couldn't see a situation where, big sort of differences of opinion are going to crystallise.
I've got two more people who've indicated to speak, but I'd like to bring a little bit of common sense into this. We're talking about an officer in consultation with the chairman and the deputy chairman, the vice chairman of the committee, and letting a ward councillor know something. I feel that if a ward councillor comes and says, I really think this is a bad idea, that we will be asking for some evidence and why they think it's a bad idea. At the end of the day, that is some debate, quickly made, and it means that the chairman and the vice chairman, if necessary, could say, in this instance, we think what you're saying is unjustified. We could say that. I mean, surely we can have some common sense applied here. Councillor McLaughlin, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Just to be clear, of the 13 properties we're talking about, 7 are already identified and offers have been accepted. So in some way, this is a retrospective permission that you're coming to this committee asking for. It doesn't matter if it is. I just want to be clear that I've got the understanding correctly. Would you like to come back on that, will you?
Thank you, Councillor McLaughlin. No, I think you got it slightly wrong there on the understanding, because whilst we've identified the 7 properties at the moment, as things stand, without the right decision this evening, we would need at some point to bring those through the committee system to get the actual acquisition approval to go to exchange of contracts for each of those. So that's the position. So unless we make, we kind of go with a recommendation or amended recommendation here, you know, all those properties would need to come through this committee.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. It doesn't say in here, sorry, the point of my question is twofold, what type of properties we're talking about. And I just want to know how this, does it?
2 and 3.
Oh, I beg your pardon. Yes, sorry. Are we talking about shared accommodation in that case? And where do we stand if this goes through with regard to, I think our target was 50 available dwellings for temporary accommodation. Can you just clarify that for me, please?
Yes. In terms of the target for 50 units of temporary accommodation, I'm pleased to report that since the Chi Committee back in December, we have taken a long lease interest on a property in Marsham Street, and that takes our number of units up to 37, and so this 13 that we're discussing now this evening is the balancing number.
And my point about whether any of these are shared accommodation, therefore perhaps counting for 2 or 3 units rather than just 1.
The feeling is that these are going to be self-contained units predominantly.
Councillor Barnett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question isn't about this, so if you want me to wait until all this is finished, I've got another point I'd like to bring up.
Is it a question on this particular item?
It's on this particular
item. Then please ask your question.
Okay, thank you. When these 13 units are delivered, who's going to manage them? Is it going to be done by NBC, or are we putting it out to a company to manage?
Thank you, Councillor Barnett. As things stand, we have a managing agent that would look after these for us, but as we grow in numbers, and it could be, you know, there would become a business case for bringing some of this expertise in-house, might be more cost efficient, but I think that's a discussion for another day. But as things stand at 50, I wouldn't see the need to change the existing approach.
Right. We are going to vote on the amendment.
So, Councillor Blackmore did. Councillor Hall
Yes.
can sum up.
Yes, I know, but I just wanted to make something clear because I heard some whispers about if we use this wording, it'll apply to all accommodation. It will not. The wording on the paper is very, very clear. It's the purchase of up to 13 properties for use as temporary accommodation for homeless persons. That is what this decision, whether it's the amendment or is applicable to. That is the case. Councillor English, once more. But
no one said anything about all accommodation. I think what was actually said was that we would have to go back and look at all 13, not just the 6, because someone said it was just the 6. So we were. I
think Mr. Cornell made that quite clear, that the way it had originally been said wasn't quite accurate, and so that will be swept up as we go through. Councillor Blackmore, you didn't speak. You seconded it. Do you wish to say something now?
I have one thing to say, Madam Chairman. I really do think we've done this issue to death. I second Councillor Harper's recommendation, and I just wish we could get on and make the acquisitions.
Councillor Harper, you wish to say anything else?
Annabelle just summed it up perfectly.
All right. So we are voting on an amendment, which is, would you please state the words again, so that we know we've got them absolutely accurate?
So, in recommendation number 1, after the words "in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of this committee," an addition of the words "and the ward councillors." So it read, "in consultation with the Chair and Vice Chair of this committee and the ward councillors."
So those in favour, please show. Those against? 5. Any abstentions? No. That is carried. It forms part of the substantive vote. Unless anybody objects, then I intend to take one,
Before we move on, can I have my dissent for the amendment noted, because I just think we will now not be able to proceed with some of these acquisitions.
Noted. We now move to the substantive vote. If there's no objection, then I will take 1, 2 and 3 together with that amendment. Those in favour, please show. Okay. Those against? 3. Abstentions? 1. So that is also carried. Thank you very much. Right. We are now going to move to agenda item 14, which is on yellow pages. So I move that Do you want a short break? Oh, right. Okay. Just wait, I just have to move this first. I move that the public be excluded from the meeting for the items set out in part 2 of the agenda because of the likely disclosure of exempt information for the reasons specified, having applied the public interest test. I'd be grateful, please, if we would have the door closed. Members, can you make sure that your microphone